design. Now, to some other stories, and despite 64% of Africans expressing confidence in the continent, they remain loyal to non-African brands, which have retained their lowly 14% of the most admired brands in Africa. These details were reviewed by Brand Africa in its 14th annual Brand Africa 100, Africa's Best Brands Research and Ranking. African nations account for 64% of the top 50 most admired countries, with South Africa, Nigeria, United States, China, and Kenya being the top 5 countries perceived to contribute to a better Africa. So why is there so much admiration, yet little love from Africans towards their own brands? Joining us for some discussion on this matter is Yvonne Okulu, co-founder and CEO, Top Dog Africa Limited, and Tembe Ekelefem, spokesperson, Brands Africa, the researcher. So Tembe, tell us what inspired this research.
The research for the last 14 years. So I founded Brand Africa in 2011. And the reason I did it is I wanted to get a barometer just to understand the state of brands in Africa, to look at where African brands are, because people are talking about Africa rising. So I wanted to say, as Africa is rising, our choices as well rising with the continent.
Let me ask Yvonne, we have so much confidence in our brands, but are not loyal to these brands. What explains this?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So thank you. I think when I read the report that Tembe and his team have put together, it's clear that we love Africa, but African brands. And so it's more, I like the phrase that I saw, and I think it resonates, made for Africa rather than made in Africa. And sometimes it's a matter of price, competitiveness. Sometimes it's a matter of legacy. What we have become accustomed to as the assets. And so you find that the older brands that have a bigger legacy sort of tend to become our aspirations. And so that's what is front and center, and that's what we are all working towards. And it will take a lot of consistent marketing, communication, community engagement, some CSR, very impactful CSR, for brands to begin to gain love among the constituency in Africa would be my thoughts. Yeah.
But I think it will first start with us loving ourselves first.
Right.
Because the fact that there's a disconnect between loving ourselves and loving what we consume, it is what Ali Mazrui said in Kenya. A Harvard professor once said that Africa produces what it doesn't consume and consumes what it doesn't produce. Because we don't love ourselves, we love to be validated by external brands. And because when we're wearing Gucci, we're wearing Louis Vuitton and all those, we think we have arrived. But when we're wearing something that is made in Ghana, made in Africa somewhere, we think that it is poor quality because we don't think well of ourselves.
Right. So Tembe and Yvonne, same question for you both. So Nike, Adidas, Samsung, Coca-Cola, and Apple have all retained their positions for the 5th consecutive year as the top 5 most admired brands in Africa. And then MTN is also somewhere there. The question is it a case that we don't have competing brands, so we are left with no choice than to patronize the ones coming from the West?
Yvonne said something about legacy as well. So when you look about legacy, from the legacy of, I was chief marketing officer for Nike for the continent for 6 years. And but what I do know in my time with the brand is that in the continent you've got billions of eyes every year, every day, who are watching football. And when they play football, what do they see? They see Nike, they see Adidas, they see Puma. The 3 of them are in the top 10 in the most admired brands in the continent. So there's eyes on the brands, but there's also validation by the players wearing those brands. What we don't have, we don't have the level of Enda from Kenya has got Enda, which is a sport brand for running, but we'd rather take a Nike because we believe it's a better product. Because when you watch television, we see all the big stars wearing Nike, and that's to me that's what the challenge is. I think the other challenge is it goes back to what I said. It's just legacy. It is identity with our self-image as Africans, and just our confidence in Made in Africa.
Yvonne?
Yeah, I would want to say that there's also the bit about investment in African brands. And so if you want to go on a head-on collision against a big global brand, it's going to cost you some money, and it's got to cost you, and it's not money at once, but it's money that you're spending consistently over a very long time to be able to gain the kind of impact and recognition that these older brands have. So there also is the point about what are African millionaires financing with their millions? How are we opening up African businesses on stock exchanges? How are we opening up our business ideas for equity in money in exchange for equity, so we can have, what is the phrase that I sometimes don't like? We can have the financial muscle to compete, because then we have a population that can consume,
Right.
but we don't have the money to serve our products to them consistently and presently as the big international brands do. So it's a hydra-headed question. I don't know if I've done justice to it.
Because
yeah.
my point is that, I mean, we've been told, and this is backed by facts and evidence, that Africa controls at least 30% of the world's resources. We have a younger population. I mean, everything is such that we have the potential to grow. Here is the case: most African countries are more interested in buying and selling, not interested in expanding. Our businesses are not joined together to make them even more powerful to compete with the established ones. As we try to address this challenge, to make the continent self-reliant, make our brands as competitive as the ones that are, globally accepted, what would be your suggestion as we take this conversation forward?
I think, and I just want to add a quick anecdote as well. If you look at Ghana and Ivory Coast, who control about 70% or 70 to 80% of the cocoa in the world. But we don't put Ghanaian made chocolates above all us. Instead, we prefer the ones that come from Switzerland, irrespective of the fact that 80% of the ingredients come from Africa. So I think part of going forward, what we need to learn from the Chinese. The Chinese closed the borders a little bit. Maybe forget the Chinese. Let me come to Botswana. So Botswana here, just next to my country, South Africa, what have they decided? They've decided that for the diamonds which come from Botswana, they are going to be mined, they're going to be cut, they're going to be polished, they're going to be beneficiated in Botswana. They brought back the head office from London, and recently, as you know, they had a discussion with the beers when the beers wanted to undercut them, and they said, "Listen, we'll create our own markets. We don't need you because we've got with diamonds." So that's a lesson that the Chinese have done so well. The Chinese closed off the borders a little bit, and they said, "Let us first get to the starting lineup, then we can compete." Because you see, most African brands, as Yvonne correctly said, we're not at a starting lineup. We are starting a 100-meter race 400 meters behind. And that's why we cannot compete with many of these global brands. But the Chinese did, for example, at Amazon, when Amazon wanted to come to China, the Chinese said, "Give us some time. We just want to start some small business called Alibaba." And when Alibaba was quite strong, the Chinese says, "Oh, we are now open for business. Please, let us compete." And by the time Amazon came in to try and compete in China, Alibaba was a formidable competitor, and they couldn't match up the competition. So that's what we need. We need some policy changes. We need some, Yvonne said, we need some investment, but we just need to catalyze the African investment, entrepreneurship rather. And most importantly, we need to teach Africans on how to build great brands.
But Yvonne, there's the African Free Continental Free Trade Area. I thought it is supposed to be the springboard to move us up there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work going on, and if I am right, it's more of capacity building right now for businesses to understand what the potential is with AFTA. So the idea is, at least for me, I would think the idea would be to stick with the process And then hopefully the market will be big enough to attract a lot of people, because then it's easy to understand why you see Nigeria rising up in Tembe's research. You see South Africa, because as individual countries, they are a big enough market size.
Right.
But when 30 million people versus 300 million, you don't attract the same investment. But then if you came together and you were a billion or two, then yes, hello, if you wanted money to invest in a brand, you will find it, and you become a more viable business and have a bigger spend for marketing, which is critical to the answers that we are all reading in this research today. It's all the marketing story that has happened, because there's nothing to prove that there aren't comparative brands of quality, etc., that are made in Africa. But the question is, what do people see? What do people know? And what are they aspiring to? And those things are the top of minds that come out in an unaided recall has happened today. So I would say AfTA is the way. The quicker we progress with it and the more consistently we stick with it, the more we will see African brands rising in the findings.
All right, Tembe,
hopefully in the 15.
I agree. I was going to say that, assuming that when AfTA opens up the borders, open up to 1.4 billion, that they'll be opening up for more African brands and not for everybody else. I think we need to prioritize African brands and African entrepreneurs.
And I guess the other issue is also about restrictions and other border controls that limit movements that all go to slow economic development and integration. What do you expect should change between the next 5 and 10 years?
Well, I think we spoke about AfCFTA, which is based there in Ghana. I think in the next 5 years, most definitely it should be, our borders should be opening up. But I think since we started the research 14 years ago, we have over-conscientized Africans now in terms of the disparity between African and non-African brands. So, but what we're also seeing, we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurship. I mean, in the financial services sector, you go to West Africa, particularly Nigeria, and then you come to East Africa, go to Kenya. You see in the fintech space, most of the brands come from that part of the world. But also, if you come from the fashion space, I mean, West Africa, South Africa, we've got some of the finest designers coming from here. So if you look at the list as well, in the top 100, 10% of the brands are luxury brands from out of the continent. The luxury brands should be coming out of Africa. It should be Makosa from South Africa. It should be Kenneth Inze from Nigeria. It should be Moses Emotions out of Rwanda. So those brands, because we have the capability to do that. It's just that we need to convince Africans that they need to look in the mirror and see what they see. What they see is an African, and that Africans should reflect who they are wherever they go in the world. So because when we go to Paris and we go to Italy and all those, they look like French and Italians, and now we want to look like them in their countries. When they come to ours, they don't want to look like us. They still stick as themselves. So we need to take us into the world wherever we go. That's how we're going to grow our brands.
Yvonne, so there's a hope, right?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. But we need speed and we need consistency.
Okay.
Correct.
Tembe, I wish you the best as you vote in South Africa. And Yvonne will close the
I'm going to vote in 2 hours.
Okay.
I'm voting in 2 hours. I always vote 5 minutes before they close.
All right, then. Guys, you have a good evening right here from the Pulse here on Joy News. We'll take a short break and return with more.